Everyone is asking whether AI is going to make trillions of dollars. Almost nobody is asking who has to spend those trillions first. Because before an AI company can make billions from an AI model, somebody has to build the data centers, buy the chips, generate the electricity, connect everything to the internet, and somehow pay for all of it. And we're talking about an absolutely ridiculous amount of money. The strange part is that the biggest risk from the AI boom might not be that AI doesn't work. It might be that AI works, just not well enough to justify everything we're spending to build it. Think about what has happened over the last few years. AI went from being something most people barely thought about to becoming one of the biggest investment stories in the world. Companies are spending billions on specialized chips. Data centers are being built at enormous scale. Energy companies are trying to secure more electricity. Cloud providers are racing to expand their infrastructure. And investors are pouring money into anything with the letters A and I attached to it. At first, this makes perfect sense. If AI is going to transform the economy, you need infrastructure to support it. It's the same reason we built roads when cars became popular, factories when industrialization took off, and telecommunications networks when the internet exploded. But there's an important difference. Those technologies eventually generated enormous amounts of economic activity. With AI, we're still trying to figure out exactly how much economic value all this infrastructure is actually going to produce. And that's where the story gets interesting. Because right now, we're effectively building the equivalent of an enormous digital city before we know exactly how many people are going to live in it. And somebody is paying for that city. Let's start with the most obvious part, the chips. Modern AI requires an absurd amount of computing power. Training increasingly sophisticated models requires specialized processors, and running those models for millions or potentially billions of users requires even more. That has created an enormous market for companies producing the hardware behind AI. But here's the thing, and you need all of this infrastructure. The question is whether it makes enough money to justify the investment. And that's essentially the question investors are starting to ask about AI. Not whether it's useful, it obviously is. Not whether people want it, they clearly do. The question is much simpler. How much economic value will AI actually create compared with the enormous amount of capital required to build it? Because there is a difference between a technology being revolutionary and a technology being a great investment. The internet was revolutionary. That didn't mean every company that invested in the internet made money. In fact, the dot-com bubble showed us exactly what happens when expectations grow faster than actual profits. And this is where the AI story gets uncomfortable. Because the companies building the infrastructure don't necessarily need AI to become the most profitable technology in history. They just need demand to keep growing. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. More users meant more computing. More computing meant more chips. More chips meant more data centers. More data centers meant more electricity. And more spending created more revenue for the companies supplying the infrastructure. It's a beautiful cycle, until it isn't. Because eventually, someone has to ask the uncomfortable question, where does the money come from? If a company spends $10 billion building AI infrastructure, that money isn't magically created. It comes from somewhere. Maybe it's existing cash. Maybe it's debt. Maybe it's investors. Maybe it's revenue from other parts of the business. And this matters because massive capital spending creates a very specific problem. The infrastructure has to earn its keep. A data center isn't like a software application that you can build once and sell infinitely at almost no additional cost. It is physical, it consumes electricity, it requires maintenance, it becomes obsolete, and the hardware inside it can lose value surprisingly quickly. So imagine we're 5 years into the AI boom. Thousands of new data centers have been built. Companies have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on chips and infrastructure. Electricity demand has surged. Investors have priced in enormous future growth. And then AI becomes good, really good, but not quite as profitable as everyone expected. Maybe companies use AI to save money rather than create entirely new businesses. Maybe customers aren't willing to pay as much as expected. Maybe competition drives prices down. Maybe open source models make advanced AI much cheaper, and suddenly we have a very strange situation. The technology is successful, the users are happy, the world has changed. But some of the infrastructure investments don't generate the returns investors expected. That's the part people often miss. A technology can win while an investment loses. And we've seen this before. Airlines need airplanes, railroads need tracks, telecommunications companies need networks. And during periods of rapid expansion, companies can massively overbuild infrastructure because everyone assumes future demand will justify it. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The most important question isn't whether AI will be useful, it's whether the economics of AI can support the amount of infrastructure we're building today. And there is another problem hiding underneath all of this: electricity. AI data centers consume enormous amounts of power, and as computing demand grows, electricity becomes one of the limiting factors. That means the AI boom is no longer just a technology story. It's becoming an energy story, a construction story, a semiconductor story, a debt story, and potentially a real estate story. Think about what that means. If AI demand continues exploding, we need more power plants, more transmission infrastructure, more data centers, more fiber, more chips, more cooling, more land, more construction. That's potentially fantastic for the companies supplying all of it. But it also means the AI boom has created a giant economic bet. A bet that future AI demand will be large enough to justify everything being built today. And here's where the story comes full circle. Everyone is trying to calculate how much money AI will make. But perhaps the more important number is how much money we're spending before that revenue arrives. Because if the spending is rational, then we're witnessing one of the largest productive investments in modern history. But if expectations get too far ahead of reality, something very different happens. The infrastructure still exists, the debt still exists, the power contracts still exist, the data centers still need customers, and investors still want their returns. That's how bubbles become dangerous. Not because the underlying technology is fake, but because perfectly real technology can be surrounded by completely unrealistic financial expectations. The railroad was real, the internet was real, the smartphone was real, and AI is almost certainly real too. But that doesn't automatically mean every dollar invested in AI today will generate $1 of profit tomorrow. And this is the part I think is most important. The AI bubble, if there is one, may not look like a spectacular collapse where everyone suddenly realizes AI was useless. It could look much more boring. AI could become incredibly important. Companies could use it everywhere. Productivity could increase. New industries could emerge. And yet, some of the investors who funded the infrastructure boom could still discover that they paid too much for the future. That's a much more interesting possibility than simply asking whether AI is a bubble.